The river that changes your mind. The river meandered silently through the forest, reflecting the trees and the night sky almost perfectly. But something was wrong. Those who approached felt strange thoughts arising without explanation, distorted memories and doubts about their own decisions. The water seemed to observe, whispering imperceptible ideas that slowly penetrated the minds of those who dared to gaze upon its surface. At first glance, the river seemed harmless, almost inviting. The current was calm, the surface still, and the wind only raised small ripples on the water. But for those paying attention, there were details out of place, reflections that did not correspond to reality, shadows that seemed to move on their own, as if the very consciousness of whoever approached was being studied. Longtime residents avoided the riverbank at night. They said the river confused thoughts, made friends doubt each other, and created fears and desires that hadn't existed before. Some returned disoriented, unable to explain what they had seen or felt. Others disappeared without a trace, leaving only objects on the bank, watches, maps, notebooks, silent witnesses that something had interfered with their minds. The silence was absolute except for the gentle whisper of the flowing water. Each visitor felt the same strangeness, ideas that weren't their own, decisions that seemed to arise spontaneously, thoughts repeated or changed. It was as if the river had the power to shape consciousness, manipulating each individual's perception of reality. The danger didn't come from the force of the water, but from the effect it had on the mind. Each person who approached was slowly seduced, manipulated, led to doubt themselves and the choices they had made. Those who ignored the signs were the first to disappear. And when that happened, nothing remained but silence, distorted reflections, and objects abandoned on the shore. At first, the visitors noticed only small changes in their thoughts. Simple decisions became confusing, memories became jumbled, and conversations with others seemed to repeat themselves in a different way. Marcus, the group's cameraman, noticed that the camera itself seemed to record scenes he didn't remember filming, angles and movements he had never made before. As they progressed, the river began to act more directly. People felt inclined to take wrong paths, to make decisions they would never have considered. Some began to argue amongst themselves, confused about what they had said minutes before. Small objects changed places when they weren't looking, as if the river were also manipulating the environment to reinforce the mental confusion. Clara, the biologist, noticed that each breath seemed slower, each step heavier, and her mind more vulnerable. She felt intrusive thoughts, as if childhood memories or old regrets were being amplified, leading the group to question not only their perceptions, but their very identities. The first disappearance occurred without warning. One of the members, distracted by the invisible whispers of the river, moved away from the bank and was slowly sucked into the water. There were no screams or splashes, only the fallen lantern reflecting on the still surface. The river seemed only to absorb, manipulating the mind until the body surrendered without resistance. Objects began to appear floating near the shore. Stopped clocks, wet maps, notebooks with repeated and distorted notes. Each fragment seemed to tell incomplete stories, increasing the mystery and fear of the group. They realized that the river did not physically attack, but had absolute control over the perception and consciousness of those who approached. If this interpretation is making you rethink this story, leave a comment below with your perspective. These videos are meant to provoke reflection, and I read all the comments. And if this type of content interests you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. The longer they stayed, the harder it became to distinguish reality from illusion. Every conversation, every thought, every step was manipulated, and the group began to suspect that those who disappeared were being carried away not only by the river, but by a force capable of shaping their own minds. With each step, the river seemed to gain awareness, adjusting the pressure on each visitor's mind. The group began to notice unsettling patterns. Phrases they had uttered were repeated in a distorted way. Ideas arose without origin, and decisions they considered rational became strange and contradictory. Evelyn, the researcher, tried to keep everyone focused, but even she felt her own memory being altered. Moments she clearly remembered began to blend with scenes that hadn't happened. Each reflection in the water showed images out of time, people who had already disappeared or even alternate versions of themselves. Clara recorded strange phenomena on the riverbanks, footprints that changed direction when no one was looking, personal objects that reappeared in different places, and small ripples in the water that seemed to mimic human movements. The group realized that the river not only manipulated thoughts but also the environment, confounding any attempt at control. An unsuspecting visitor was swept partially into the water, his feet seeming to sink more slowly than they should, time dragging on around him. His thoughts became incoherent, memories jumbled, and he finally disappeared without resistance, leaving only a lantern floating. The psychological tension increased as everyone realized there was no way to fight the river. Every second near it made the mind vulnerable, and any attempt to escape was thwarted by its manipulation of time and perception. Even the most skeptical began to doubt their own memories and decisions. The night wore on without anyone being able to tell exactly how much time had passed. The river continued to flow slowly, reflecting the trees like a broken mirror, but something had changed. The silence now seemed to press down on their thoughts, pushing strange ideas into everyone's minds. Simple decisions became impossible. The group discussed without remembering how the conversation had begun. The riverbank began to look different with each glance. Paths that once led away from the river now seemed to lead directly to the water. Evelyn had a clear feeling that she had already made that decision before. To have walked away, to have stayed, to have returned, all at the same time. The doubt didn't come from outside. It came from within. Marcus raised the camera to record the surface, but hesitated. The image on the viewfinder showed something he didn't remember experiencing. The group standing still, motionless, staring at the river, as if they had already given up on leaving. When he lowered the camera, that scene still echoed in his mind like an implanted memory. Then someone stepped forward. No one could say who decided first. There was no resistance. The body simply moved, obeying a thought that seemed too logical to question. The water touched their ankles, cold and heavy, and their minds quieted, as if they had finally made the right choice. The disappearance was silent. There was no struggle, no panic, just the feeling that the person had never been there. The group tried to react, but every decision against the river seemed to require an absurd effort, as if thinking about fleeing was harder than surrendering. Another member approached the bank, convinced he needed to go in to help. His thoughts weren't confused, they were too clear. The river offered simple answers, comfortable certainties. When the water covered him, no one could shout. The idea of calling for help simply didn't occur to him. Reflections began to emerge on the surface. Calm faces, serene expressions, tranquil versions of those who had disappeared. The river showed no fear. It showed relief. Each reflection seemed to suggest that the right choice had been made. When silence returned to the riverbank, only objects scattered on the damp ground remained. The water continued to flow in the same way, indifferent, as if nothing had happened. The river did not force anything. It merely changed the way people thought, until they gave up resisting. Dawn arrived slowly. The pale light pierced the thin mist and revealed the river exactly as it always had been. The current flowed calmly, steadily, reflecting the clear sky between the trees. To any casual observer, there was no sign of danger, nor any trace of what had transpired during the night. Those few who managed to get away walked in silence, unable to organize their own thoughts. Simple decisions seemed to require effort. Memories came in fragments, and the feeling of having left something behind was impossible to ignore. None of them tried to explain what they saw. The words seemed wrong, as if they no longer belonged to the same logic. Days later, the search began. Authorities scoured the riverbank, recorded forgotten objects, photographed confused footprints that disappeared near the water. Nothing was found. No concrete evidence. No body. The river continued flowing, oblivious, repeating the same tranquil sound as always. Eventually, the case was closed. Accidents, disorientation, human error, the kind of explanation that doesn't require difficult questions. No warning signs were put up. No fence. The path to the riverbank remained open as if the place had never posed any risk. New people began to appear. Hikers, curious onlookers, solitary travelers. Some stopped for a few minutes, observing the water, feeling a strange clarity arise in their minds. Thoughts became organized. Doubts disappeared. Old decisions suddenly seemed obvious. Some went a step further. The river flowed patiently, always ready to help those tired of overthinking. It didn't push, it didn't drag. It simply offered a choice that made too much sense to refuse. And when someone accepted, the current continued as before, carrying with it not only bodies, but everything that made someone capable of going back. If you enjoyed this approach and want to continue exploring stories that are almost never told this way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And now, click on the video that's appearing on the screen. It directly complements what you just watched and may completely change the way you see this story.